Good morning, everybody. I really wish I didn't have to make this video, but it looks like more inflation and food shortages and scarcity is on the way. And there's nothing we can do about it now, but it could have been so easily avoided because of so many bad decisions and bad long-term policies that have been pursued by the Johnson regime here in the UK and other regimes around the world. First of all, the green ideology, absolute nonsense of dismantling a perfectly good system and economy that runs on fossil fuels in order to change our energy sources to things which are unreliable and don't produce much energy, such as wind and solar, and giving up lots of prime agricultural land to build solar panels. So instead of growing food to feed people, we're trying to get energy from the sun. Great when the sun's shining in the summer, but in the winter, when the sun's not shining, these things don't provide hardly any energy. And then wind turbines and offshore wind farms, for example, that don't provide any energy when the wind stops blowing. And what I think is an act of utter ridiculous destruction is the dynamiting and blowing up of a number of coal power stations in the country. There are some that remain, which we can reopen again, and the government is going to have to do that this autumn, or they've already done it actually, because there's a shortage of energy from solar and wind. But some of our coal power stations have just been blown up so they can never be used again, which is essentially, an act of green terrorism. That's one thing. The other thing was the insanity of the last 2 years, where supply chains around the world have been disrupted and ruined. And so now there's shortages all over the place because the economy has been totally reshaped, whether that's deliberate, and part of it is because of the World Economic Forum's plans for the Great Reset, and others through unintended consequences. But whatever the case, whatever the motivation of individuals at different levels in the scheme, lots of businesses have gone to the wall. They've gone bankrupt because they said only essential businesses can keep trading. Now, this has never, ever happened, ever in the history of the country. Not even in the time of the Black Death did you have the government saying, forcing all businesses all over the country in certain sectors that they declared non-essential to close. Yet if a village or a town was affected by the bubonic plague, they closed down and they isolated themselves from the rest of the world. But there was no national blanket ban on trading and business. People just did what they needed to do to not get infected and die. But then we've had the last 2 years, we now see data coming out that shows that, first of all, the injections were not safe, and clearly you've got the leaders of the UK, of both the main political parties, clearly having gatherings together, certainly not afraid of a deadly virus when they put in place these rules to close down what they called non-essential businesses. But they were not worried. They were not staying isolated in their homes. They were gathering together in large numbers to socialise and work together. If they were really worried about something, they wouldn't have done that. So this was all completely unnecessary, but the consequences of that we have to live with, our supply chains are wrecked all over the world. Even now in China, it's still going on. They've closed down the city of Shanghai. They've closed down many other cities around China that you don't see on the news, and boats waiting to pick up cargo, to drop cargo off, are just sailing around the sea. off the east of China. Same situation in California, off the coast of Los Angeles and so on, the ports over there. There's just not enough room and space to get cargo in and out. So you've got, for example, car manufacturers in Europe are having 1 year waiting lists for the latest cars. Because they can't get the chips and so on for all the electronics in these new cars. I mean, I don't have one of them. The car I drive actually is from the last century, the last millennium actually, because I don't actually want a car which is full of all this smart technology. You know, my car hardly ever goes wrong. It's only worth like 200 quid, but it's brilliant. Never goes wrong. It's like a dream. So, you know, anyway, that's an aside. But the other thing that is causing chaos in the global markets is the war in Ukraine. Again, completely avoidable, but NATO has been poking the bear in the east of Ukraine, supporting the Zelensky regime, the Poroshenko regime. Before that, he was installed after a coup, which ousted Yanukovych, who was democratically elected, because he decided that he didn't want to sign an association agreement with the EU. He didn't want to be part of NATO. People in the US State Department, like Victoria Nuland, didn't like that, so they agitated to get rid of him. There was the coup. They put in their puppets. Now you've got Zelensky, who was an actor. He used to do all kinds of degenerate stuff, like playing a piano with his... You know, I won't say it, but you've probably seen the video. You know, it's rather degenerate, and the sort of degenerate dancing that he's done in the past. Yeah, anyway, never mind. But that's the kind of guy he is. And of course, he is supporting the Azov battalion Nazis, who are now the bulk of the core, the backbone of the Ukrainian army and security services that are fighting Russia. You know, but we should just stay out of that. It's nothing to do with NATO. It shouldn't be anything to do with NATO and NATO countries, but of course we know that they're all getting really involved. And then Johnson yesterday, on the eve of Victory in Europe Day, announced that he's going to be sending £1.3 billion of military aid to Ukraine to fight Russia. It's none of our business in the UK. We should just let this blow over, calm down, and then get round the table and sort out peace. But they're not doing this. They're stoking this up and they want this to continue. But of course, with this actual kinetic war going on in Ukraine, there's the wider economic war. And Western nations have stupidly said they're going to apply sanctions to Russia, which isn't going to hurt the Russian regime. It's going to hurt the people in the West far, far more. So now, of course, most of the countries of Europe are going to have to pay Russia for the gas and oil and other supplies in rubles. But the headlines are all about oil and gas. But what's not being spoken about is fertilizer. And most of the fertilizer we get in the West comes from Russia. So we're going to have to pay, we are having to pay huge amounts more money for fertilizer from Russia, or actually a lot of Western countries have sanctioned Russia, so we can't buy fertilizer from Russia because they've said we're not allowed to buy things from Russia, which means that farmers do not have the fertilizer at the beginning of planting season. So this is going to feed through into the autumn, and this is when we're going to start to see big food shortages. We've already got inflation because of the massive quantitative easing that the governments have done over the last 2 years. They've basically increased the national debt by 25%, so the money supply is increased by 25%. So 25% inflation is baked in. We can't avoid that now. Many of you have seen already prices of foods and groceries in the shops have gone up by about 25%. I noticed that myself. The price of petrol's gone up by 25 to 30% since the beginning of the year. This is partly due to the quantitative easing, but then on top of that, we've got the sanctions on Russia. Russia that are now feeding in because of supply and demand. They've artificially lowered the supply of all, the biggest goods and things that we need to keep things going. So petrol, diesel, fertilizer. Basically, those are three huge factors, not exactly raw materials, but things that we need to keep our country going, to keep the transport system moving, the energy going, and of course to keep our food supply going. If we don't have the supply of fertilizer, farmers are not going to be able to plant crops, well, they will be able to plant crops, but the yields will be very, very much lower. And in some countries, we're already seeing this. I mean, there was a report yesterday, even in the mainstream media, about Sri Lanka, and saying their yields are down, or they're going to be down 75%. They're only going to get 25% of the crops that they would normally get because they haven't got the fertilizer to actually grow more crops and get the yields that they normally do when they use fertilizer. And also because the price of petrol, diesel, which is what's used for tractors and all sort of agricultural machinery, because the price of diesel is much higher, then of course farmers can't afford the diesel actually to go out and plow their fields properly, as they have done before. And if they do, then of course that's going to feed into the price of food. So there's higher labor costs, higher fuel costs, higher energy costs, higher fertilizer costs, if you can get fertilizer in the first place. And this is a global problem. It's not just Sri Lanka. It's going to be here in the West. That's already happening, and that's going to feed in to autumn. In the harvest, when we pick our harvest, there's not going to be as much food as there normally is. And what food there is going to be a much higher price, because the price which farmers have had to put in is much higher for diesel, fertilizer, etc. So this is just basic economics. Because of the sanctions on Russia, the war on Russia, the quantitative easing, the green ideology, and also crazy now Western countries, including here, are talking about rewilding. So just when we need more prime agricultural land and to use it all to get the maximum amount of food that we can, they're paying farmers to stop farming and to rewild their land and give it over to nature again. Okay, nice idea if you've got more land than you need and more food than you need, but in a country like the UK, England is more densely populated than India, so we are not going to be able to grow all the food that we need to supply the population that lives in the UK. It's absolutely crazy to pursue rewilding now, and also biodiesel, biofuels, turning over crops into producing energy, petrol and diesel, when we need those crops for food. This is another thing that's going on. So there's all kinds of crazy policies that the government is pursuing, which is just the wrong thing all across the board. All these things together are creating a perfect storm. And some people would say, well, this is just incompetence, but there's more than incompetence here. I mean, some people, yes, they are grossly incompetent. You can see that they're not particularly clever, a lot of the people in government, but some of the people are actually, I would suggest, doing this on purpose, according to a plan, to bring in shortages so that they can get the Great Reset and get everybody onto central bank digital currency, where we don't have pounds, we don't have cash anymore. We have some new currency that they're going to create, a global currency. And it may even be, some people even want the currency that we use to be energy. So this would all tie into a scarcity of energy because of green ideology, and they would tie everything to how much energy you use, how much carbon you're creating. There's all these carbon accountancy systems and trading schemes that have been set up over the last 20 years or so. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody somewhere had the idea of actually making carbon or the right to emit carbon dioxide the currency, which would be absolutely insane. But that's the ultimate in green ideology. People have proposed this before, actually, with the whole idea of technocracy and so on. I'll try and find some articles and link that down below. But the long and short of this video is I wish I wasn't going to have to. I wish I didn't have to make this video, because it seems very, very clear that food shortages and an increase in inflation beyond, way beyond what we've seen already is coming. And what we've got already is hard enough for most families to bear. Energy costs on our electricity and gas bills in the UK have gone up something like nearly 100%. When the sort of cap raised at the start of April, it's going to go up again in October, because the government cap, they do price setting here for energy, but that's a whole other issue. But the cap is going to go up. It goes up every 6 months. They reset the energy price that companies can charge. It's gone up already. It's going to go up again in October. Heaven knows what it's going to go up to then. But all of these other issues which could all be avoided. We don't need to dismantle our fossil fuel system, and we don't need to ban cars and petrol and diesel cars, and we don't need to blow up power stations. We didn't need massive quantitative easing for lockdowns. We don't need to be at war with Russia. We don't need to put sanctions on Russia, which are making things harder for us because we can't get oil and gas and fertilizer. All of these things are utterly insane and are altogether hurting ordinary working people in the UK and the rest of the West, and all around the world as well. This is having knock-on effects everywhere, because the supply chains are now global. With the free trade that's been built up. I mean, I'm for free trade as long as it doesn't hurt workers who are doing hard-working people in the UK and other countries, but I'm not for global government, because governments are always interfering with the free trade system and trying to put in place their own silly ideologies. Green ideology is one of them. So, even if we stop all of these crazy policies right now, it's going to take a couple of years to get back to normal, because this has been going on with the breaking down of supply chains that began with the lockdowns in the beginning of 2020. We're now sort of 2 years into this, and supply chains are still being disrupted. So it's going to take at least as long again to get back to normal. That's if we start now and start doing everything right and stop doing all these stupid things that governments are doing, all at the behest of the World Economic Forum and other companies, and other businesses and organizations that want this great reset. The scarcity for the winter is baked in. We are not going to be able to avoid that. So what I would suggest is you start preparing now. Start preparing to have enough food to eat over the winter, and think about other things, energy, think about where you keep your money. I'm not a financial advisor, but over the last 10 years, all over the West, every country has put in place legislation to say that if there's another financial crash, the money which you have in the bank is not your money, it's the bank's money, and that can be forfeited, that can be sequestered, if you like, and frozen, and you may lose your money. If there is another situation like 2007, 2008, we won't have a bailout with the government bailing out the banks. They just simply don't have the money to do that anymore. There will be a bail-in. So I think there's something like 1.7 trillion pounds in bank accounts in the UK. So we have a national debt of 2.3 billion. So if there is a bail-in, what they could do is just take all the money in everyone's bank accounts, and that would then go most of the way to pay off national debt or to save banks and organizations that may crash in the future. Now, again, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not giving financial advice, and I'm not saying with 100% certainty what's going to happen. But I would just say, think about these things for yourself, and think about what you're going to do. That's all I'm saying. So, you can take that as you like. Okay, well, I've spoken for, I think, 20 minutes now. So that's enough to think about today. Again, I wish I didn't have to make this video. I wish we had wise leaders, but we've got the poorest set of low caliber leaders that we've ever had across all the Western nations, and it's leading us into disaster. I'm trying to make a difference, so please do come and join me in the Heritage Party to at least make a challenge in the political sphere, at least be a voice in the political sphere to talk about all these things and how we just need to turn back on them to get back to just simple common sense. Economically as well as socially and culturally. I talk about those issues as well. I've done, you've seen my videos and talking about woke culture and all this stuff, but just simple economic common sense has completely gone out of the window. There's no difference now between the fake conservatives that are running the economy into the ground and Tony Blair's Labour, the Labour Party, which always gets the country into massive national debt and leaves nothing for whoever comes after. So, the Johnson regime has piled on more national debt than Tony Blair ever did. He actually makes them look relatively financially competent, even though they were completely incompetent. So, there you have it. Okay, I will say goodbye for now, but as I said, please do join us in the Heritage Party. Think about it. Think about getting involved actively, because the time for being passive and just saying, there's nothing we can do is over. We need to get political power, and so that we can change these things. I can't promise to do anything right now because I'm not in power. I wish I was, because then none of this stuff would be happening. I wish people had voted me to be the mayor of London, and then we wouldn't. London would not be continuing to be run down. But there we go. I'm going to carry on, and please, thank you for everyone who's joined me. And please do come and join in the fight to restore sanity and common sense to our nation. God bless you all.